Hello C4D community, my name is Hranitzky and I'm very happy and excited to be part of this 3D motion design show today. Especially a big thank you goes out to Maxon for inviting me to be able to talk to you, to inspire this community and give some new inputs and maybe some tips and tricks, and also to share some insights about this project I'm going to talk about coming up. So today we're going to see an exclusive behind the scenes peek at one of our recent projects that we just finished up very recently, which was for Wacom, the makers of the creative pen tablets that probably a lot of you are using. So for this project, we were approached by Wacom and we have a long-lasting relationship with them. I've been working with Wacom for quite a few years, created multiple animations and product trailers for them, which is always a lot of fun because we have a lot of creative freedom to pretty much create whatever we want. Most of the time at least. And for this round, we were asked to create a product promo for an upcoming project that is still in development, which is the Wacom VR pen. So let's take a look at it.
This is Wacom VR pen. This is unlike any other pen which Wacom created before, and it will be our transition point into the next creative future. Wacom's more than 30 years of pen technology and experience are utilized in this breakthrough.
We have developed a truly ergonomic design, optimizing for the VR creation, natural grip style while uncompromising precision, size, weight, and easy access to each button.
This pressure-sensitive pen creates a natural pen experience in air drawing by using pen grip force to deliver your intended pressure. Our independent stand-alone tracking system is compatible with major head-mounted display in the market. While being able to sketch in VR world, this product also features our EMR pen tablet integration. It enables creators to combine their 2D pen tablets for accurate sketch or annotation with the physical surface. We are very excited about this product, and we believe creators as well. But we need more right partners to make it penetrate. So I like to welcome to anybody who are so excited with this device, please join us and let's create together. Thank you.
Of course, this project wasn't created just by myself. I had a fantastic team that was supporting me. So credit where credit is due. I was supported by fantastic artists and friends, namely Max Iglesias, Can Erdoman, Michael Münch, and Markus Adam, who all helped to contribute to make this work. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things, not just about the technical side of things, about how and which button was pushed, but also about the creative process and what went into the thinking of why we did it the way we did. But of course, we're going to see a lot of C4D and even a little bit of After Effects. So we're going to talk about the rendering, we're going to talk about takes, a little bit about lighting, also about rigging and how the whole hand and the look was created. So before we get started, what do we get from the client if the product doesn't even really exist? So what we usually receive from the client is, of course, a briefing and something that is called a CMF sheet, a content material finish sheet, that basically defines which materials there will be on the product surfaces. So we had to work with this, and of course we also received a CAD model, I think it was a step model, that we had to transport into Cinema 4D to get everything going and be ready to be used within Cinema 4D and rendered beautifully. We also received a couple of photos showing a 3D mock-up. Basically, it's like a rapid prototyping model that was showing us the proper size as well as how it is looking when it is properly being held in the hand. We then went ahead and created a look and style frame sheet, basically something to come up with Are we going to do it on black or I'm going to do it on white? So we are sending this back and forth to the client, and what you can see here is not really a rendering that we did, but we basically extracted the pre-rendering that we received from the client and put it on a white and a black background, as well as creating a stroke just to give the impression of how it can be displayed when in use. One of the main things we wanted to achieve was having almost abstract look. Because the shapes are so distinct, we want it to be very close, almost into a macro level. So as we move out and process through the product trailer, we wanted to have beautiful shots that progressively move out until you see the final product. And then of course, there will be a hand that will grab this product, and it was difficult to come up with an idea. So we were inspired by the setup process of VR headsets, because it's pretty much used seeing semi-transparent hands. So we wanted to use the semi-transparent hand to, one, show a hand, that it's something that you can grab and hold. And then second, it will convey the idea of a VR product. And third, you will be able to see the product through the hand and maybe even highlight certain buttons that are being pushed. But of course, we wanted to start with the product beauty shots first. And let me show you how I created these in Cinema 4D. So let's talk about the camera setup and the animations for the first couple of beauty shots. So as you can see, here's our setup. We have multiple cameras. Some of them were used, some of them were not used. And for most of the cameras, we do have a null object that uses it as a pivot point or as a point of interest. So the camera is orbiting around that specific point. Sometimes that point is also animated. So there's nothing really too fancy going on in this one. This was one of the discarded reveal shots. We were not quite happy with the pen leaving the actual framing. And speaking of framing, the way I usually work with the camera is orienting on the one hand at what could be somewhat realistic in the real world. So not to go too crazy with camera moves. At the same time, also work with different focal lengths. So I'm trying to keep to the focal lengths that are realistic. And remember, you can change the focal length from the default 36 millimeters. So you might have a look at that just to play with focal length and see how that will affect the image. For example, for this one, we use the focal length of 85 millimeters, so we don't have too much of a distortion. For other shots, we were going with the focal length that is rather wide angle, as for example, for the reveal one. I think this one was 50. The other one, I think, was 24, as you can see in this one. But another thing that is really helpful is using some guides that will actually help you to compose the image. And to achieve that, you can go into composition and you can enable the composition helpers with this button. And you have a choice of certain helpers that will actually help you in a creative composition way. For example, you can have the grid that will divide the image into thirds, but what I use mostly is both the golden spiral as well as the golden section that will help you to show you how the image is composed. And as you can see, for example, for this one, we were not too crazy about it, but we are keeping the point of interest all in this region, which is this button that will have some nice lighting and highlight effects once the light is moving across the animation of the shot. So we can really highlight the actual beauty. And concept-wise, the idea was to be really, really close in the beginning, not really seeing what it is that we are showing. Is it a product? Is it maybe a diamond with all the glitter? We don't know it yet, but with each shot, we move out more and more until we'll see the full reveal of the actual pen. So this was then output as just a regular playblast. We just went ahead and created a make preview. We defined the ranges, saved it as an MP4 file, collected it, cut it together in one sequence without any specific rule of which clip comes first or last. We just wanted to send it out to the client just to get some initial feedback if the look and the animation progress was something that was desired. After we have created a couple of camera animations, we sent these off as a playblast to the client to sign them off, because obviously we want to get feedback if this is the right direction we're moving before we even start the shading and rendering process. However, in the meantime, Max as well as Chan were working on further parts of the project. So I was very happy to have Chan Eduman on board to help with the rigging and animation process of the hand. So how was the communication? Well, I mean, obviously we are in the middle of a pandemic and Can is not sitting right here in Munich. So I was trying to do my best to convey the idea of what we had in mind and how the animation should look. And here's also my sort of briefing to Can, where I'm kind of trying to just explain to him what I have in mind for that squeeze moment when you see that pen stroke being painted in air. Also der Pen macht so einen Strich, ne? So, und dann kommt er so in die Kamera und dann so, und dann siehst du, wie er drückt, so, und der Strich wird dicker und dann geht der Stift wieder raus. Also quasi so. Of course, it's all in German, but anyway, I think the sound effects will do justice and convey the dynamic effect we wanted to transport over here. So, of course, I wasn't involved in the actual rigging part, but I have a surprise guest. Actually, I have two surprise guests, but the first one is Can Erduman, who is working as a fantastic animator, digital artist, and rigger. So let's hand it off to Can. Can, take it away.
Hey, Rob and Matthias. Also greetings to Paul. Thanks for having me. As Rob mentioned, I'm a character specialist for everything character related inside Cinema 4D. And this project in particular was rather interesting, not because it was super complicated or anything, but because we were super smart and saved a lot of time using the content browser. There we grabbed an asset which already had all the rigging done. So we just refined and finalized the rig to be ready for the animation. But enough talk, let's just jump right into Cinema 4D. So we are in Cinema, and as I mentioned before, we used this content browser guy over here, which has lots of nice details. We all deleted them and we just used his fingers without textures. So as you can see, the resolution is, for our purposes, is really good. And we get rid of all those other stuff here. And I have to say also that this kind of rig for the fingers was a bit weird, so we didn't use this one. And I made a simple one also. So with that being said, let's just undo everything and go to the next one, which is body 01. And here you see I've already deleted the left parts, and now I'm trying to isolate everything I need here, so I can go to the build mode of the character object and just go over here and delete stuff. And with all those things going on, I just continued to clean up everything. So I collapsed the character object and searched for all the important stuff for the arms. And as you can see, the object manager is full of it. And that's pretty much just one arm. So there's a lot of stuff here. And yeah, I'm cleaning up everything. So we end up with this. And as you can see, I have the minimalistic thing that's still there. So we have the IK here, and this is the FK, and the special joints for the rotation. As you can see, here they are turning inside there, so we have a smooth rotation. And then I got a step further and I made my own rig. So what I've done there is just a really simple thing. So you can just have the controls over here, select them and go to per object manipulation, and then you can rotate them hopefully in the right direction. Not this one. It's always the last axis. So like this. Oh, this hurts so much. And yeah, this was a really simple one. So no fancy sliders, anything, but it had one very smart thing inside. And that was that you can just select something and you can also translate it, which is super important later up. So we had this IK going on here, and an additional one for the entire arm, and I also had a constraint so you can have something that simulates the shoulder and moves it around. And now we come to the next one. So we added the pen. And again, we have the shoulder over here moving, this arm here moving, all the fingers moving. And we had one super cool controller. And this is one thing that's important for a rigger to know what kind of axis you need to make a good animation. So if you are a rigger and you also animate, this would be perfect. So you would instantly know to put this controller in, because this controller is moving the hand around where the tip is. This is basically what you do when you're writing, right? So this is what we constrained to the spline curve, so to say. And another important thing was the pen. So let me just isolate this one. So where's the pen? Here's the pen. And here we got several controllers all mapped in here. So we can have the rotation of the wheel, or have the pen tip over here being pushed in, several buttons. You can push everything in, and you have even the charging is over here. Yeah, that's it for the Wacom pen. And in animation, it looks like this. So if you go into a view where you don't look to the render camera, you see that's just plain animation, really simple. And one important thing to mention, which is quite interesting, is that I did this interesting hand pose where you have this index finger pressed a bit. So this was also where I had the opportunity to move this a bit. And I really like this because I have an emphasis on finger positions from an artistical standpoint. But the issue was that Wacom doesn't design the peripherals to have stressed muscle movement or anything. So this needed to be more relaxed. That way we could also show the finger squeeze a bit better. The next thing is how we attached it to the stroke. So you see how the animation works. And you have the time lapse here, or the slowdown of the time. And all we did was that we took this controller here, and we had a simple constraint to a null object, which is over here. And this one is just attached to the spline that's moving around. So it's just a chain of constraints and a controller, so you can offset it. So you see there's pretty much happening there. This is the main thing that makes the animation in the curvature nice, is really this here. And I also added some shoulder movement, so you see that the shoulder is moving forward. But the most important thing in the animation, besides of course the tip, is how the elbow flows, because it always leads the movement. So it's like if you're doing some karate or kung fu, you will always see that the elbow is, or the movement comes out of the elbow. And yeah, that's pretty much everything from my side. I would say we also have some animation here, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So it's back to you, Robert. See you. Bye bye.
Robert, what are you doing? John has finished his part.
What? What?
What are you doing, man?
It's VR research, dude. Come on, it's research.
You gotta be kidding.
All right, I get back on. Okay. Where were we? All right, now let's talk about the rendering process. Oftentimes you get asked, which renderer did you use to create this? And my answer to that would be, does it really matter? Honestly, I've been working on a Mac for so long, and I'm still working on a Mac, just upgraded last year to the latest Mac Pro, and I'm really happy with the system. But again, let me just think about that of maybe unemotionalizing the render process, because to me it's just the result that matters. Really, the client is not going to bother if it's going to be rendered in this or that render engine. So what is really important is the result. So of course it matters for this talk to talk about render engines, and let me go into a few details. To answer the question, we were using this guy here to render the final outcome, but we were also looking at Octane X to be specific first, because I wanted to jump ahead and try Octane on the Mac, because I've never really used it, and the whole reason why I bought this expensive machine was to get into the GPU rendering. So Octane X was available pretty soon on macOS Catalina, and I was trying it out and maybe trying to figure out a way. And to be honest, the model itself, it looked quite all right. We had some pretty decent textures for this, and everything was going well until we hit a little brick wall with when it came to the shading of the hand, because we wanted to have this very distinctive look on the hands. We couldn't achieve this result, so that was the time when we actually switched renderers, and Max was kind enough to change all the textures and the settings to make it work with Arnold render. Let me quickly show you how the setup was done in Octane X on macOS. All right, and here we are with our setup of the Wacom pen for Octane X. I'm currently using the PR4 release that was just released prior to this video, and it works quite well on the Mac. As you can see, I'm using the AMD W5700X graphics card in my Mac Pro, and the speeds are quite nice. Works really well. And as you can see, we also have a lot of depth of field, and this was intended because we wanted to be very flexible in the way we are working with the depth of field, and also we set up a focus object so we can just simply pull this around just to select the different focus distance and to focus the attention of the viewer on a different area of the pen. So this was all good, and we were pretty happy with it, and everything worked quite well. The texture is not quite finished. The leather texture was also mapped in a triplanar way, and again, it's not completely finished, but we hit a little brick wall when we started to work on the shading of our holographic or ghost hand that is holding the pen. And let me switch that on quickly. You will notice that the look shows a few of the issues we were facing. One of them was the actual look of the hands themselves, but also you could see that the hand is influencing the look of the pen. And also you can see some of the back faces of the 3D hand showing through, and this was hard for us to manage, and actually we didn't end up managing it. So if you have any solution for that, just drop it in a comment. But this was one of the reasons why Max was switching to Arnold render in the middle of this setup and changed all the textures and the shading to make it work in Arnold, and then we moved on with Arnold from that point on. So let's take a look at the lighting setup for this project. So for this, I'm gonna switch my layout to the Arnold standard preset that I have created here, and you can see I'm using the Arnold renderer version 3.2, and you will also notice that I have a watermark right here, which is not so bad, because actually it is pretty cool, because my license has expired, because I was only licensing it for a month when I was rendering. The way we worked was Max was working on his PC, and he has a permanent license, and he was setting up the shaders and everything, and I was testing it with the watermarked version, and also we were testing to see if there are any differences in the look between the Mac and the PC version, and we didn't notice any visual differences. And as soon as we were finished, I licensed Arnold for a month, and then I could render without the watermark, and we could also mix and match the frames between the Mac and the PC render. So that was pretty cool. And let me just go ahead and select one of the other cameras where we can see the actual lighting setup. So let's go with the pen-tip frontal, and let's go ahead and turn off the depth of field so we have a little bit of a faster result. And let's just move the camera a little bit more to the beginning. But we'll see how we set up the actual lighting. We were setting up multiple lights to simulate a somewhat realistic scenario as you would have in a studio setup with all the nice reflections and highlights going. So going to the rim top light, you will notice that we have one of those softbox wrinkles textures that we took from the fantastic Grayscale Gorilla Lightkit Pro set. We didn't light it with Lightkit Pro, but we used some of the textures, namely this softbox wrinkle texture. So why were we using this? Because if you look at the actual render, you will see a couple of imperfections in the light. So this would simulate and emulate what we would have in a realistic scenario. Of course, no softbox is super perfect. And actually, I quite like these little imperfections. It will give you a more realistic look. The other thing that we used was darkening the edges. And there's a soft edge feature in Arnold, and we can turn it down to, let's say, 0.2, or even turn it off completely, and then you'll notice you have a harsh edge. And if you like that look, of course you can go ahead with that. But honestly, we preferred something a little bit more softer around the edges. And to give you the extreme example and to see and show how it looks without the softbox texture, I can also clear this texture and you will notice the dramatic difference in how the lighting looks. So you have a super harsh light that looks a little bit artificial in my opinion, but using that softbox and the soft edges will help you to give a more natural and realistic look on the lighting. Okay, so let's talk about the take system that we used extensively for this project. The take system is pretty cool because it can store multiple versions, so to say, or multiple cameras within its file. And this can also trigger the render process. So for example, we have set it up in a way that each take or each camera has its own take. So if I play that, I can toggle through CO1, which is camera 1, 2, camera 3, 4, 5, and so on. So it's a very flexible system to toggle between the cameras. And also it allows you to mark each specific take to be rendered. And also we can choose which camera we want to see in that specific take. So for example, of course, CO1 uses camera 1 and so on. And also you can define the frame length and the frame range that we want to render. So we had a couple of different sets ranging from 3 to 5 seconds, and each of them are marked down here. And on the right side, you can also see everything that has been changed in the file. So it could be the lighting, for example. We changed a couple of the lights for the top reveal to have them either stronger or a little bit more subtle. And it's a very straightforward process. And the other benefit was that I could, of course, create a section of takes to be rendered. So for example, on a Friday, I would set up 3 or 4 takes to render over the weekend. And then I could log in remotely via my own VPN setting to Apple Remote Desktop and see if some of the takes were finished. And if they were finished, I could restart them, let's say on a Sunday, so that on Monday everything was ready. So this was the take system, the way we set it up. And let me quickly show you how to set up a new take. So for this, I'm going to go to the main. This is very important. Go back to the main, and then let's just create a new camera. And I'm going to select that new camera, and I'm going to call this camera Maxon, just for the sake of demoing it. And I'm just going to go ahead and have an entirely new shot. Let's frame this like this. Set up the keyframes at the start and also the rotation, and just go to, let's say, 120. So we're going to have 4 seconds. We're going to move up a little and rotate a little, just something like that. Nothing too fancy. All right, so let's give it a couple of keyframes here as well. And let's check out the very rough animation that we have here. And that looks good. All right, and then we go back to the take system. Then we're going to create a new take and call this the Maxon take. And here we are asked, which camera do you want to use? And I would like to use the camera Maxon. And of course, I want to have 0 to 120 because we have 120 frames. We can deselect all of them. And then I could go ahead and say render mark takes to picture viewer. And again, you can go through all the takes and see them. So you can see that all the cameras are still there, but here is our very specific Maxon take that we just created. And another very helpful thing to set up is the way you are specifying the save project or the save naming. So for this, you can go ahead and choose a preset of that, Or you can use this naming, which is the $take /$take VO3, and then this will inherit take the naming of the takes. So this way you make sure that everything is named properly according to your take naming if you have done it properly. So this was very helpful in our process of making sure everything renders smooth and reliably. One of the key features we had in mind for this project was to have these, I would call it ghost hands or ghost hand that is holding the Wacom VR pen in its hand. So for this, we had a very, very precise look in mind. It had to be semi-translucent. It had to not shadow itself. It didn't have to show back faces. It didn't have to influence the pen in any way. And it was not that easy to set up the proper way of how we wanted to have this hand look. And we went through a couple of iterations, and you can see a couple of the octane tests, and we had difficulties of coming up with the proper translucency without any refractions. But after a while, once we switched to Arnold render, Max was pretty much a genius in coming up with a setup that worked like a charm. So in order to see the actual process of how this was created, I would like to hand it off to my friend Max, who will walk you through some of the processes behind the setup of the shader. Max, take it away.
Thank you, Robert. Regarding the shading, we were actually pretty happy with the beauty renderings in Octane, but for the hand, we wanted to have a distinctive look that you maybe know from VR controls. That is, for the hand, that you have almost no visible back faces of the hand, and it's transparent and doesn't actually influence the look of the pen. So what you here see is a very early version of the scene where I tried different shaders, and as you can see, it's pretty horrible. The pen is refracting in the hand. The hand itself is showing itself within transparency, and you can see like polygon faces that you shouldn't be able to see. So I went to different iterations of the shader, and I tried some toon shading, and I tried some tricks of maybe whenever I show the back face, I have like a material that isn't showing or is blank more or less. But the actual trick is within the Arnold tag. You can define which rays are considered and with every object. And so to the lower right, if you can see here, the trick was to more or less disable all rays except the primary camera rays, and also disable any self-shadowing. And then if you put on a more advanced material like this, and I think this one is pretty close to the final, you can see we achieved the look we wanted. So the hand is transparent and you can actually see the pen or the buttons, but it's not showing itself anymore. If I look here at the index finger, it's there, it looks pretty nice, but you can't see inside. Also, a neat little feature is that this is actually considering motion blur and depth of field within the rendering. And this more or less eliminated any need for us to do any transparency tricks of the hand in compositing or render twice. And also it rendered super fast. But of course, this is like an early scene and all the shading here is not there yet. So let me switch to like a more advanced scene. And this is more or less the final. We also had this neat feature to display a color lookup. If that's pretty similar to what we used for the final rendering. So for look development, this can help. And most shaders were pretty standard, just simple plastic shaders where we just added some Cinema 4D noises that are supported in Arnold to give the roughness a bit more natural look and feel. But as you can see from this shader tree, it's pretty simple and straightforward. Not so the leather, for example. That was mainly because we used triplanar for texturing. We had this really nice leather texture, but the model itself comes from like a CAD model that these are usually pretty unoptimized for any artistic work. So we didn't want to do a UV mapping of the whole thing. And then we used triplanar and it worked pretty damn good. Like we were absolutely happy about the way the leather wrapped around the model. And for more realism, because as you can see in this shot, we got pretty close. We also used displacement from Arnold. One thing that is important when you use sub-poly displacement is that your object, let me here switch to like a grid. It looks almost black, but as you can see, we tried to bring the model in with a pretty regular grid, so the displacement doesn't look wonky in certain areas. And another great feature of Arnold was, as you can see, it's called auto bump. That is in the displacement tag. And what this means is it's considering the displacement inside the bump texture. And if I turn this off on both things, I'm not sure if in the recording you can see this, but from our tests, the results were amazing. It was you almost wouldn't need any additional subdivisions if you used auto bump. And the additional render time was absolutely negligible. And we were super happy with the result. Another thing we did shading-wise that you probably won't notice, but sometimes you get into pretty detailed work is for this button. Let me just do a zoom so you can see this better. For this button, the geometry is actually lacking any small dents. And Arnold has this feature of adding fake round corners. And we also implemented a curvature shader as well. Let me just show you the effect of it. It's very subtle, but you see this curvature shader highlights the top of this button. And in conjunction with the round corners, it actually makes a difference for freaks like us who love to indulge into really the shading. Also, this close-up put some challenges on the rubber material. So with support of a friend, Daniel, I tweaked a lot on the bump map shadings here to get the feeling of the rubber right. For this example, I disabled the depth of field. We ended up actually rendering in real 3D depth of field for all shots. And this worked out pretty well, but to be honest, the render times get up if you use actual 3D rendered depth of field. But Robert used some pretty interesting tricks in compositing, how you can get rid of some of the noise. Back to you, Robert.
After everything was rendered, the result was looking pretty decent, so there was not too much post-production involved. Usually I do heavy post-production in After Effects, but this time we had to do a minimal set of things. One of them was getting rid of some of the noise we had because we just couldn't crank up the samples endlessly. So there were a few tricks that I did to get rid of some of the noise, and let me show you how it was done in After Effects. All right, so let's take a look at the shots in After Effects and how everything came together. So let's play this top reveal shot, and you can see that the camera moves along and reveals the actual brand and the product itself. And although it looks pretty decent, we're not quite there yet. There's not too much that we had to do in post-production in After Effects, but one of the main things that we noticed was a little bit of noise. We had a pretty decent setting of the sampling rate, but still we had some noise. Even more dramatic is the noise in the alpha. And if we toggle the alpha mode, so just to see the edges, you will notice that there is some substantial noise happening in the alpha channel. So how can we get rid of that? Obviously, re-rendering wasn't really an option for this one. So I came up with a little trick that Max already mentioned before. So the way to remove that was just to blur the blurred edges slightly more. So for that, we can create a mask. And since we have a built-in alpha channel, I'm going to duplicate that layer, call this matte. And then we're going to use a new adjustment layer. And we're just going to call this blur. And in that blur, we're just going to apply a fast box blur with a setting of, I don't know, 6 or 5 maybe, whatever works just to see that this is somewhat blurred. In the final version, we use the Frischluft depth of field or autofocus effect just to give it some more natural blur, but this will do just fine for demo purposes. Of course, you have to make sure that the blur is under the matte, and we're going to use the alpha inverted matte. And for that, we still have to make sure the alpha inverted matte is actually the right size. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and solo this one and give you the alpha setting. And we're going to select the Minimax filter. So let's type in Minimax. And here I can specify if I want to use the color or alpha, and I have to make sure to use alpha, and then I can crank this up or down. And depending on what I have set it up to, minimum or maximum, this will shrink or enlarge the actual matte. So let's leave it at 20 or 25, something like this, and go back to see our result. And then you will see that the actual blur is happening only in the areas of the edges. Okay, so especially in this area, you can see the rough edges. And if I toggle this on or off, I can control also how much blur will happen by adjusting the Minimax setting. So this works quite well. You don't have to go too far, otherwise it will be noticeable. But for this area, it works quite well. Let's go out and let's take a look at it. All right, so this looks much better, much cleaner edges, especially when we move down. However, as you can see, once we move out, the focus is shifting, and the way we set up the shot is everything is with a shallow depth of field, and once we see the whole pen, everything should be in focus, so that is very easy to fix. All you have to do is go into your blur settings and animate the blur radius as well while we go down, and let's set it to maybe 1. Probably we can go also with 0.2 ever so slightly, and then you will notice that the effect will look pretty nice. And this is the way we got rid of that noise on the alpha areas. However, we're not quite there yet. We still need to do some work with the actual look. We wanted to have a little bit more of a bluish color. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and create yet another adjustment layer. Make sure it's on the top. Call it look, and I'm going to apply the Magic Bullet Looks effect onto that. And just released in a brand new version, which has even more features and control about how you want to color grade your footage, which is pretty cool. So for this, I'm just going to add in the tools palette a lookup table, a LUT. And right here, I have the very same Grayscale Gorilla LUT that we used for this project, so I can apply that really easily. And also, I want to add maybe a 4-way color corrector just to give it some more coolness in the shadow. So for this, I can choose between shadows, midtones, and highlights. And I'm just going to drag down the shadows just to make them a little bit cooler, give them more of a metallic kind of look. Maybe something like this. This is fine, and you can see instantly the huge difference. So this is before and this is after. And let's check it out. So this looks pretty good. And a couple of minor things we did for the actual final version, let me just go to a slightly more advanced version, is that we added some chromatic aberrations to the edges, just to give it some slight imperfections, just to make it a little bit more organic. So here you can see the before, and this is with chromatic aberrations, and then you have the looks, and then you also have the grain. And for the grain, you can either use digital grain that is also built into looks, or you can use footage elements. And for this, we usually use the regrain footage elements, or actually scanned stock, that will give you a pretty good result, and it doesn't have to render, you just overlay it. And this is how it looks at the end. Of course, we also wanted to have what we call talking heads. So that will be a person from Wacom that will talk about the vision and the idea behind this upcoming product that is still in development. So we were toying around with a few ideas, and then we thought, hey, why not have the CEO of Wacom talk about the vision of this project? So we ended up really getting the CEO, Nobu Ide, from Wacom on board. And a funny story, I was I was trying to come up with the final concept and the script, what should be said based on some of the key facts that we received from Wacom. So we set up a Zoom call with the Wacom headquarters in Tokyo, as well as with the Wacom headquarters here in Germany. And of course, the CEO of Wacom was there as well. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, Robert, just explain the concept to me. And I had to give like an impromptu presentation of our concept. So I was pretty nervous about that. He liked the concept, thankfully, signed it off, and he was all into being filmed for this. So for this whole filming section, of course, we couldn't travel to Japan to art direct it or to direct it. So I was giving more or less precise instructions, working very closely with a fantastic team in Japan as well as in Germany. And we had a pretty straightforward idea, having a blurred background, something slick, a beautiful light to focus on the person. So they were sending me a couple of images from their HQ, which is a tower in downtown Tokyo, which looked beautiful. And we signed that off. Basically, we made just a few annotations that nothing is sticking out of the head when it's filmed, because you have those window frames. But it was a pretty straightforward process. And of course, once we received the material, I was downloading it on 3 different internet connections to get everything in time, because we just got it really late in the process. And then everything was edited by Michael Münch and then taken to color grading to Markus Adam from Scanwork, who was working his magic in color grading it. And there's a particular thing that we want to point out. We had a color scheme in mind, which was based on the black of the pen, but also on some bluish and orangish colors for the skin tones. So basically going down the orange and teal look. And as you can see, once you look at the color grading, you'll be able to spread across and have the corresponding opposite colors. So of course, the complementary color for blue is orange. So you can see there's multiple shades of this color popping up across the whole product trailer that makes it all cohesive and come together in a very nice and beautiful way. So finally, we were done with this project. The client was happy, we were happy, and it was such good fun to work on this project with this fantastic team. Again, big thanks to Wacom for allowing me to present and talk about this project, as well as a big thank you to Maxon for inviting me to talk to you. So I hope this talk gave you some inspiration and some insights into our creative process, as well as the technical areas of this project. So thanks again, and stay safe out there, and see you next time.